it has some issues here in terms of like it falls for a couple of like misconceptions that are very predominant within this space and the industry in general, which are not true and are not helpful when talking about this situation in terms of like exploitation in the anime industry. And I don't think they help the case. And I think a lot of them are kind of lazy, and I think that they kind of push the blame, or they move bits of data in such a way which are just not helpful for the conversation. I think it's important, if we're going to have that conversation, that we have it more broadly, where like I can agree with like the general outline of this video. I think I can kind of agree with it to a degree. I think the solution they've came up with, I completely disagree with. I think it's just no, it's not the way you would do this. And some of the way they got there, like the history, is a bit wonky, and some of the admiration for certain talents, I think, is probably ill-placed for this topic. But I understand that these figures are people, they're ones that a lot of people really like their work and obviously have a lot of admiration for them. But I don't know if they are the people you should be picking up as the people fighting for the rights of people in this industry, when they, categorically have people telling you they were actually maybe not so good on this topic. I will see what people say in terms of, can they hear this? Is it an okay audio level? I think I've got it decreased. I need people to tell me if it's good, okay. Or maybe I need to turn up a little bit.
This incident was a mystery. The big question being whether he did it himself or whether it was staged. It would take the government 4 years to finish their investigation. That after he'd worked 600 hours with no paid overtime in a week where he couldn't even go home, the man had ended his life, working for one of the most famous anime studios in Japan, which got off completely scot-free.
In order to know what's even worse, how much coverage do you think this got, given how popular anime is?
The lines are like 5 hours.
Earthquake, we're all fucking dying.
I think the editing is fine. I think it might be, I guess it's a preference. I think you could argue it might be a little overdone on the editing. There's a lot going on the screen, which I don't know is wholly relevant, but it's fine. Like, I can appreciate the After Effects comping, but it sometimes throws a lot at you, like a lot of stuff going on here, a lot of quotes and stuff which aren't told where they're from. I think that's a problem, to be like, where is this information coming from? What are we doing here?
You've been staring at the truth for years. It's just been one click away.
But yeah, one of the key points I think I wrote down in my document is, when you have a lot of visuals on the screen, it can be fine, but when you have like a lot of visual information thrown at an audience, it's easier for them to kind of like be sort of almost, it's like a bit, I don't know if I would say gish gallop, but it's kind of like you're throwing a lot at people at once. They're trying to take it in, they're moving from topic to topic. It's harder for them to be more critical of the information you're throwing at them. I don't even know if it's a TikTok. I don't know what it would be considered. But it is. I think it's just the style of which they have a preference towards.
Neverland quickly became the most popular of the season.
Now, again, like when you say popular of the season, this is a Mal. When you
everything was phenomenal. So
when we're referencing Mal, I'll say this because I don't want to talk over him too much at this point. When we're referencing Mal doesn't mean anything in terms of popularity. It really only exists within a online bubble where like it's. I mean, maybe this is a little bit facetious, but like something that's super popular on Mal doesn't necessarily mean it's the biggest show in Japan or in the world or whatever. Like that, they're very different metrics. But I digress. But I think this is the thing where like there are some bits of information here where like, I mean, on its own, that's kind of like whatever. But it's just like you have to know what's a reliable source when we're dictating conversations.
The
Anyway.
Promised Neverland Season 2 was announced in early 2021. Anime fans expected nothing less than an epic sequel to the story that shook the winter of 2019. But that's not what they got.
I just finished watching episode 6 of Promised Neverland Season 2,
again,
and it is
bro,
the most abominable, putrid pile of dog shit I've ever seen.
Bro, fucking reactor streamer is not a source, okay?
Really
I get that that's a sentiment that people didn't like it, okay?
Became one of the biggest mysteries of 2021.
I mean,
such a popular series,
I don't know if this has anything to do with exploitation
was the
necessarily,
animation
though.
studio just inept? Was it higher up corporate pressure? Was the manga artist pulling the strings?
I mean, the manga artist did allegedly have some role in that, but
overshadowed by the other two series Studio Cloverworks made in 2021, The Promised Neverland Season 2 was seemingly thrown out the window as if the entire series was a failure. As if the first season wasn't a mega popular
definitely
success,
not what
as if
happened.
The studio was in debt or something.
Every studio's in debt.
As fans were finishing up Demon Slayer and Attack on Titan
Fucking
Season
hell.
3,
I'm sorry, but it's like every studio in the anime industry is in debt. Cloverworks is not like unique, and like having multiple projects at once is not like unusual for a studio, but they tend to be done by different like groups. They tend to have their own like usually it can depend, but like usually you kind of like for a project will have its own set group of animators. It's hard to say if like Wonder Egg had anything to do with this show being that like there are so many factors in production that like I don't think we can. I think it's completely conjecture. The thing with an anime project, right, and this is kind of important to realize here, is season 1, you can get all these people together and it can be like lightning in the bottle, right? All their schedules come together, everyone comes on the project, and you get like a lot of people who are passionate, and maybe you get like a lot of animators in. It's like, oh, we prepped it, we planned it ahead, we've had all our pre-production time to plan everything, we've grabbed everyone here, and all these schedules are open right now, and they've came and we did season 1 and it went banging, and then it's suddenly like, oh well, season 2 comes around and it's like, oh, everyone's like, oh, we're sorry, we're busy, we're already booked. Oh, sorry, I'm busy, I'm booked. Because like so much of it freelancers, right? So it's like maybe you've got your salary workers. If I don't know how many Clover salary animators they have, of course those ones might be on different projects. But like then there could just be a case of like, yeah, they couldn't get the same animators as the last time. They couldn't get a lot of those people to come back because they were working on something else. It's an industry which is the speed of which is pretty intense. Schedules are always moving, especially with freelancers, and freelancers are notably very flaky in general when it comes to an industry, especially the good freelancers, right? Because they're always in demand. So like there's so many factors there that could have changed the propulsion there. And I don't personally, I wasn't planning to go in a deep dive for fucking some random show that came out several years ago and like what really went wrong, because like I don't think it matters what actually went wrong, but it's just like this way of framing it isn't necessarily true. It could be part of that. Like exploitation is a part and it is a problem, but I don't know if it was like a unique issue in this situation. I mean, One Punch Man is actually kind of interesting though, because One Punch Man's issue is that like the original staff were just really, really great, and it was just incredibly lucky that they got them all together at that point. A lot of them came, well, I think about a third of them came off Space Dandy because the director... God, who is it? There's like somebody who worked on Space Dandy, because the director of One Punch Man, I'm pretty sure he worked on Space Dandy, and he brought a lot of people from Space Dandy with him to Madhouse to work on One Punch Man Season 1. The producer also got a bunch of talent together. So you had a bunch of people from the in-house talent at Madhouse. You had about a third of the staff from Dandy, and then you had a bunch of other people that the producer and the director would have probably found elsewhere. So you had a really strong cast of animators that you wouldn't usually get together. And when Season 2 came a-knocking, well, the director didn't obviously had another schedule. I don't think he was interested in making a season 2. He had other projects in mind. So it was a situation where Madhouse was booked. The director had a different project at Madhouse going on, and the entire project was then given to a completely different studio, JC Staff. JC Staff is a decent studio. They're a good studio. They aren't Madhouse. JC Staff can make some really good stuff, but they are not, by their nature, an action shonen sort of studio. That's not usually their bread and butter, and they are not going to compete with Madhouse, especially when Madhouse has also a bunch of Bones animators. You're just not going to compete with that. It's just that's just the nature of it, right? Like that's just how it's going to be. The schedule might be worse because of obviously the first season did well. There's 1,000 factors here that could have been affecting that. It's not with Natsume, was it? But yeah, he was like, again, he was working pretty heavily on Dandy, and Dandy had also a very special selection of animators who then a good portion of them ended up moving with Natsume onto his next project. Anyway, let me keep going with the video because I've gotten into a bit of a tangent there.
Something odd.
I'll let him talk for a bit.
Not only The Promised Neverland, but also Darling in the Franxx and Bunny Girl Senpai in the same fiscal year, the studio had made no profit. In fact, they were 7 million yen in the hole.
Darling in the Franxx was
because as the anime industry reported
A1 Pictures.
I
mean, maybe they did some
trillion
stuff.
Yen. Industry surveys reported that the back end of the anime industry was actually in a crisis.
I mean, it has been for years.
Studios in debt. The industry shrinking by 5%. Anime numbers collapsing for.
The anime industry isn't shrinking, it's growing. Maybe he's talking about the studios are shrinking, but the actual broader anime industry is not shrinking at all. But this is the thing, is like you just put data on the screen. I'm not sure where this data is coming from. Is this from the animation report? Is this from the animation the general animation report? The anime, what do they call it? The anime studio industry report they do every year. Is that where this is from? This is where it'd be good to have that on screen so I could actually tell where there's a... I mean, I know for a fact, in the background, that blurred shit, that stuff in the background is all from the animation report. Because I recognize those graphs. I don't recognize the graph in the middle, So I don't know if that's still from it. I assume maybe it is. There might be. This is the problem with it, right? And he does have a source document, but I don't remember this actually having a direct source that's like blatantly in the document. So I don't think Clover had anything to do with Darling the Franks, did they? Or am I misunderstanding what he just said?
4 years.
Did they work on that too? Maybe they did some work on it?
And what seemed like an endless stream of employee horror stories. It was so bad.
Okay, again, like that's a lot of information to throw at someone, and I don't know where that came from or what that was supposed to be saying.
Another collapse. Something that anime had actually done to itself. In the 1960s, the manga
this is
anime
where I
industry
start
got
getting
into
a
civil
big
war. Specifically
problem.
this man, godfather of Mongo, Osamu
Because this
Tezuka,
information
but
he's about
Japan's
to tell
animation
everyone
studio
is
was a load of shit.
bullshit.
Tezuka was a massive bitch. Feeling like he had no control over his story and the production process, Tezuka decided to build his own anime
This
studio
part's
from
true.
the fortune he made and take the direction of anime into his own hands, eventually arriving at his crown jewel, an anime adaptation of his manga masterpiece, Astro Boy.
I'm sorry here, but like anyone who knows anything about Mushi Pro production would not say that Astro Boy is like the crown jewel of Mushi Pro. Mushi Pro, while it was working, had some really interesting and groundbreaking shows and movies, which were much more interesting from an animation perspective than Astro Boy was, their first project. Astro Boy is very formative, we all know this, but like, let's be real about it. Ashino Joe is a much more visually interesting and captivating show than the original Astro Boy is. Let's not pretend, okay? Or we could talk about Dororo. We could talk about Belladonna of Sadness. Everyone loved Toei, including the staff that worked there. Not necessarily. There's actually, we'll get to that conversation
Now
in a
with an
second.
anime on his hands, all you had to do was bid for a slot in the air, which unbeknownst to Tezuka meant that he had to outbid the one and only
Disney.
I don't know where he's getting this information from either. This is confusing me a bit, because Disney was not in the conversation when Astro Boy was coming out. Maybe in the American slots, but I don't think that's how it works. I mean, forgive me if I'm wrong here, but like my recollection of this stuff is that if you're selling the rights to an anime to an international party, they are paying you, not the other way around. So he's not outbidding Disney. He would have been outbidding people in Japan, where Disney isn't really a deal in the 60s. They're not really in the table.
The government and see if they needed any money lately.
Faced with the challenge of having to financially outbid Disney.
So, like,
in order to air his anime to the public,
I don't know what the fuck he's talking about here. I'm
He might
sorry.
not have been as rich as Disney, but he had bigger balls.
Maybe, I don't know.
And so he decided to take the age-old financial advice of, if you can't buy it,
That Amazon is not a source,
then
but
go
okay.
into debt for it. A lot of debt.
No, that's not what happens.
Luckily,
That's
since
not what
Astro Boy
happens.
was already
But
popular in Japan, and Tezuka decided to push.
again, it's like, all right, so we have a quote on the screen. Where's this quote from? Many of the animators were shocked at the amount they had in such a short amount of time, amounting to a frame a picture a day, thinking it was impossible. I mean, this could be a real quote, but I do not recall where this is actually from. Maybe it is from fucking Helen McCarthy's book on like Tezuka from like a decade ago. Maybe it is from Anime History, or like a paraphrased quote from Anime History. Maybe it's from Wikipedia. That is the problem with such a thing, right?
For the unheard of rate of an episode a week, Tezuka managed to turn his smart financial decision into billions of dollars of profit.
Again, that's Wikipedia again, so I'm going to assume that quote a second ago was from Wikipedia, which is the problem I'm talking about here. That's just Wikipedia. I can see the citation marks and the blue. This is Wikipedia. Why are you showing me Wikipedia?
Merchandise. Faced with that amount of money, other animation studios quickly conformed to this weekly schedule, using Tezuka's refined techniques to kind of cheat the animation process.
Okay, I do want to say a couple of things, right? So the animation industry in Japan did not randomly appear in 1962 or 3. I think it was 1963, was it? I sometimes forget this date because I think it's somewhere with, but anyway, it doesn't really matter too much about it. The issue here is limited animation was not created by Tezuka. There were definitely shows on Japanese television that had some form of limited animation on like TV shows beforehand, not like full animated shows necessarily, but they did have sequences which were animated, like The Simpsons originally, right? Simpsons was like an animated sequence from a broader television show that was shown in America. So these things did exist. There was an animation industry before Tezuka, and limited animation is not exactly strangers to this industry. It was not strangers to the American industry, right? He had a specific way of doing it in terms of like he had a basis for the stories we're talking about. He owned the rights to a bunch of stories that he drew himself, and he had these manga panels which they could probably use as a rough guide to their storyboards, and then he had a rule of like, let's just do a couple of pieces of like a couple of drawings. We'll really cut down the amount of drawings we need to present it to the television, and use other limited techniques.
Make it easier to upload every week.
Right.
Tezuka to the god of anime, as well as manga. It's a spicy title. There's only one problem though. Astro Boy looks like this.
Last night at the Institute of Science.
Modern anime looks like this.
Incorrect. Well, no, like Astro Boy has different stages, right? There are episodes of Astro Boy which are more impressive than others, especially at the beginning. It can be quite rough around the edges. There are definitely parts where they have a couple more interesting cuts, but Mushi Pro as a studio was not one that was just like, we're just going to do a couple frames. Like, if you look at any other Mushi Pro production, especially as the years go by, they start getting really good at being experimental, at using interesting cuts, using angles, and using directing to their advantages. Like, the industry of anime as we know it was defined by Mushi Pro staff learning and experimenting within that system.
That weekly upload schedule has not changed. In addition,
but the weekly schedule, I do want to say, like, this Tezuka did not create a weekly schedule. The weekly schedule and the way it's formatted in anime, it's definitely a problem. But Tezuka did not create a weekly format. TV shows are shown weekly. Manga comes out weekly. There is a industry of weekly byproducts, and the reason something come out weekly, like what Tezuka is doing, is it's the most advantageous for him at the time to be doing it that way. But usually cartoons were all animated in batches and then released. But Tezuka was kind of more like, oh no, we'll just keep going. I think that's kind of part of his like routine here. It's not necessarily that Tezuka created like limited animation or weekly schedules. He just kind of took a systems that exist, and usually ones you don't use for animation, and kind of went with it. But like, it's not like animation on a weekly basis didn't exist beforehand. It's just that, usually you would animate all in batches, then go. But I think Tezuka used the idea that he can be like, no, with my new technique, I can do more episodes, and you don't have to wait for another batch to be finished. I think he used that as a leg up in the thing, that because the original Astro Boy series ran for like 170 episodes or something straight. It's pretty impressive, right? Mostly straight. I think it was mostly the whole time just running. There might be some breaks here and there. I forget in terms of like holidays or whatever. Sometimes it's holiday. But I think it was pretty consistently running, which sounds to me like a horror show. But to each their own, I suppose.
Not every animation studio could just go into hilarious amounts of debt. And while TV stations...
Tezuka didn't go into debt though. I think this is something that's probably worth bringing up. Most people don't know this. Tezuka actually didn't go into debt
by the time Neon Genesis
necessarily.
Around anime, it was just getting way too expensive.
Expensive, again, this is just not true. Neon Genesis Evangelion was not a show that was specifically more expensive than any other coming out at that time. I feel like this is some sort of inference they have from that misinformation that like it ran out of money, which again is just not true. Evangelion probably had the same kind of money that most TV shows would have had at that time. Just the general same kind of like resources. I don't think it was unique. It was not like it was most TV shows in anime back in the day, especially, there's comparable levels of money. I actually might need to look at something else in my document. So there's usually a misconception about how much the anime cost at Mushi Pro. Now, I'm not saying it cost more, but I think that a lot of people have misunderstandings about how these things are measured. So usually he might say it in a second, but and there were ideas that initially the price of each episode would be, I think the original price he set, and I think this was the price of money they were getting from the TV studio.
550,000 yen.
Per episode. It was too little for the total sums of making an episode of a TV anime. So the article is called, Osamu Tezuka responsible for low anime wages? Maybe not, says author. This is from 2020. It's from a Japanese book. I think I own it somewhere. Where it was a book that kind of, I think it's usually hit the lexicon of Japan. It never got translated in English, unfortunately. But it was generally making the case that what you've been told about this Tezuka shit is generally just incorrect. And there's other reasons why it's incorrect. But basically that the price of making one episode of anime at Tezuka Productions was more like 1.5 million yen. It was not 500,000 yen. That was, I guess, an initial estimate that was incorrect. the basis for a lot of this conversation will come around this misconception as we go forward, okay? So let me get back to this for a second. I'll let it play.
And with Japan's economic miracle about to explode in the country's face, the decision was made to implement a relatively unknown funding strategy that had in it a slow, creeping death. That explains how animators can barely afford food while their creations go on to rake in billions of dollars of profit and being nearly impossible to escape from. But the worst part is,
there's a lot of
you
reasons
already know what it is.
for
K-On!
that.
Is a slice of life anime involving
I don't know what
high
K-On! is
school
gonna roll,
girls who
but
make
okay.
a band called the Sakurako K-On! Bu.
The
Pretty cute
reasons
show, but when I
that
watched it for the
happened
first time, I found something
are maybe
really
different than what he's about to
Besides the
say.
fact that Mio overrated, Ritsu best girl. In the opening of every episode,
Yeah, if I could have got my
multiple
PNG
text would
tuber
appear on
going,
screen
I would
without fail that
I
made
would
me
have, but I
question
couldn't get it
my
working right now.
sanity. Here, see if you can spot it.
What are we looking at? Okay.
There. The show about the fictional Sakurako Keionbu was produced by the Sakurako Keionbu. And once I saw that,
Production
it was like
committees.
the floodgates had opened. Nier Automata, Land of the Lustrous, Anohana, even The Promised Neverland. Nearly every single
I
anime
will
had
give
this
him credit
weird
for at
little
least
text at the
understanding what a
end, and
production
then
committee
some
is.
just didn't include it. And with how anime credits are structured, the
But
most important people came at the
I
end. So what
think
was more
that
important than
the way he,
animation
if I remember right, the way he
studio,
talks
the
about this
anime
might not be
director,
quite
even the
right.
author? Remember when I brought up Astro Boy and Chainsaw Man? Well, let me ask you something. What's the actual difference between these two anyways? More
I think it would be a waste of time to
detail?
talk about
More
the
good
differences
stuff?
between
I mean,
these two
okay,
things.
This picture probably took longer to draw, but aren't animation studios made up of artists? Just throw a few on there and it would take like an hour, right? It can't be that hard. Oh
No.
my god. That's what the problem
That's
is.
not how it
only
works,
is
but-
there like a million frames in a single anime episode, there's 2D art, 3D
That's
art,
a movie,
special
not a
effects,
television.
voice actors.
There always
Music,
has been,
people who
yeah.
Plan, stage, direct, scriptwrite, edit, manage the whole operation. Whether it's so employees know what's going on or keeping character models consistent so a character doesn't suddenly
Yeah, this
become a
is
different
just
race
this.
the next
This has
time you
always
see
been the
them.
issue
anime
with the
production
industry for the
process is
entire history of it.
So with all these people running
In
around
general,
and
yeah.
busting their asses to make your favorite anime, let me ask you a question. Who's gonna pay all of that?
7% here, a loss of 37 points or so. Apple shares are just getting hammered.
Making anime is like entering the
I'm-
stock market.
I mean, usually it's the production that
When you
pay
buy a
them, but
company's
okay.
stock, you're technically buying
It's supposed to be the
an
studio, I
ownership
suppose,
company,
but you
which
know,
means
the
that you
money comes from
technically have power
productions,
over what the
maybe
company
television
does.
shows,
But come on, what are
television
you gonna do with their 0.1
broadcast.
shares of Apple? And we all know due diligence is a myth. Now, okay, forget about all that bullshit. What's the real reason you invest in the stock market? Money. And that, my friends,
I mean,
is
it's
what
gambling,
Neon
but
Genesis
okay.
Evangelion did to anime. It turned the entire thing into the stock market, which means that a few girls and a guy with mental health issues
no,
have
that's
made it
not
so
what
that you
happened.
could own a portion of your favorite
No,
anime and
that's-
even make
that's
money
not what
off of it
happened.
if it does well. Isn't that great? I lied.
That's not true.
You can't. Because the only people allowed to enter the anime market are people who can pull a Tezuka and spin an anime into $1 billion of profit, which nowadays means you have to be a corporation. And with each anime being infinitely more complicated
I mean,
than the
kind of,
last, and
but
production
maybe
values skyrocketing with little to stop them.
Maybe this is time to talk about how that's maybe now. That's not necessarily the case for all studios. I think there's a lot of information we've thrown at here, and I'm not sure what part to focus on first. Maybe I should start with like when we talk about production committee, right? Anime did not invent the production committee. The production committee is a very common like structure that has been used for years, and even in the anime industry before Evangelion, production committee structures were often used maybe in like bigger movies. Like Akira had a production committee that came out in 1988. That's quite a while before even Evangelion, right? I'm pretty sure technically Nausicaa had a production committee in that it had multiple parties to finance it. It had Takuma Shoten, it had Toei as a film backer, and it also had was it Dentsu as well on top of. Who else was there? I mean, obviously we would have had the studio Topcraft as well. So there's at least 4 different people with money and interest in Nausicaa from what I remember off the top of my head. That is a production committee. Now, production committees generally for TV anime are not good. They're not necessarily the whole reason of why wages stagnated and went lower. We can get into that a bit more as time goes, because I probably don't want to stop too much for this tangent 100%. But the stock market comparison is a bit nonsense, because it's not stock market. It's about it's just like having multiple producers all fund the project to some degree, but that means that the bottom line or the percentages you might get out of it are probably going to be split further as an animation studio, which is the problem, right? It gives you a safety. But again, Evangelion did not create even the TV production committee system. The TV production committee system was created by the recession, by the crash because companies were more afraid to invest a lot of money. I mean, comparatively, it's maybe not, but like just the idea of like all that money, like a TV studio or one advertiser, one advertiser broadcaster was feeling the fear of not necessarily having a chance to make that money back, throwing all that money at once. No one wants to throw all that money at once, I guess, was really the thing. Is that like, it costs us much money. Do we want to just throw that amount of money into the fucking ether and see if it will do anything? That's the concern, right? And especially when, like, again, people are feeling the pinch. That we're not in the era of money anymore. So there are more concerns about those kind of things, and that's where a system of which protects the general party from like one person going bankrupt, and also maybe everyone gets some spoils, came more advantageous in the TV space. So I don't think the stock market really helps as a comparison here, because generally the anime companies are not on the stock market either.
Making the entire process an expensive,
they're not publicly traded companies.
Wait, hold up a second. If production values are going up, then why are 40% of all anime studios in debt? Shouldn't the production committee raise enough money?
We could go back to Mushi Pro to explain this.
Well, let me introduce you to one man. PewDiePie.
What? No, I forgot about this. Why?
Waging a sub battle against TC.
This has nothing to do with anything here. Why are we talking about PewDiePie?
But does anyone actually care? It wasn't like after the dust settled, everyone thought
he
was a massive loser.
I'm gonna have to just talk about this. This is just not. This has nothing to do with anything. Okay.
Replace a few labels on the graph, and suddenly you have Japanese intercorporate culture.
What? No.
Production committees are made up of companies coming from various industries. If two companies come from the
same
industry,
that nothing to do with PewDiePie. What?
Body pillows, there will inevitably be one company that outsells the other, aka a winner and a loser.
Yeah, welcome to capitalism, buddy.
Japanese companies really don't like being the loser. So much to the point that there will only be one company per industry on the production committee, severely limiting the amount of money that can go into anime production.
Okay. Wait, let's pause for that. I think I know where he's getting this information from, but I don't actually think he understands the context. I need to explain this to people. There would be no reason for you to have two. I mean, they don't. Again, I think because he's going back to the video that was Toshio Okada made about the production company system. But the problem is that video was about modern production companies and the influx of money from streaming and American foreign companies. That is not a conversation that we would be having in the 90s or the 80s or even the 2000s, really. He's talking about a very specific time and a very specific way that a production company has responded to the idea of a lot of foreign money coming into the industry. If you think about this going back to the 90s, there would be no reason for you to have two music labels on one anime. Like, what would be the point of that? Because, like, the idea is supposed to be that, like, it's the music in the show comes from the library of your music buddy, right? The person on the production committee who's here for music is here because they have an interest in selling their artists or an original soundtrack or a CD from the thing that you are selling. So if you have two music companies in the same production committee, they are already butting heads because, like, well, who gets what music? How we split? Like, you are creating. That sounds like a nightmare. Why would you do that? I mean, maybe somebody does that, but in my head, I'm like, what? That would make no sense. Like, the entire point of the production committee in the original form, in the 90s form, let's say, in the 90s TV form, is that each of these companies has something to gain from being part of this production. So if Bandai was there, Bandai might make figures, and if a music company like Victor is there, they might make a CD, and if a toy company was there, this is a common thing back from the 70s, right? If, like, random Japanese toy company that's probably out of business now was in here, they want to sell robot toys. Like, that was like with the whole deal with Gundam, right? Would you really go up to them and be like, oh, we're going to get two separate toy companies on this one? Doesn't that sound like that might cause a bit of, like, infighting? Yeah, Urusei Yatsura was produced by Kitty Film. Kitty Film, might be a little Kitty Film is actually a music label, right? I think they might have a label called Kitty Music, but Kitty Film is a subdivision. It's a sub-department, if I remember right, of Kitty Music, or Kitty Film might be I can't remember if that's actually just their name. Are they just Kitty Film even though they make music? But yeah, they were a music label, and they branched out into media, and they branched out into video anime and TV anime. and they were the main sort of like, because with like Ursa Yatsura, you also have the Fuji TV. So you have Fuji TV and Kitty Film. So those were the two main partners in making that show happen. But you know who wasn't there? Sony Music Entertainment. Because it's like, what would be the point?
Okay, you know what? Let's just get someone in the industry.
So like what Toshio Okada is talking about here is a situation that affects the modern industry, but would not affect the industry going back during the time of Evangelion. And full disclaimer here, Okada had nothing to do with Evangelion. He was not he'd left Gainax by that point. So his opinions of anything that happened during Evangelion mean nothing more than a fan's opinion. Because he doesn't know anything about the production outside of rumors and whatever people would have told him on the production.
Okay, Japanese companies suck, but what about foreign ones? Surely some big international company has looked at this and realized it might make them some money, right?
Well, yeah, they have.
Not really.
Yes, they have. What?
Stocks, money is control.
So to prevent some random company from essentially buying out their anime, the production
are we joking?
company will take that foreign investment meant for one anime and instead of put it into 100, screwing literally every...
But they do put foreign investment in there. It's just that these... So, I maybe this is unfair, but I do have a document. In my document, I have a more modern... It came out after... I think it came out after this video. So, obviously, using that, it might be unfair to some degree to use it to be like, well, I'm going to disprove you with information you couldn't have possibly have had. But I think that it is very transparent. So, this is just a random write-up. I don't think you can find the Japanese website document anymore, but there was a lot of write-ups in different magazines. I think this is CBR, so like take it with a grain of salt, but like they're just sort of like reading up. They're basically writing up what Buka Shushin, is it Buka Shushin? The Japanese Agents of Cultural Affairs, that website did a digital sort of breakdown. This is probably Netflix Japan, and they made a report on ways they can deal with the anime industry. But like Netflix is quite engaged in the industry and different studios, right? I think we all could relate. I don't think that's unusual, right? So what they said about this is that they've tried to create a more transparent area by making sure that the companies give them back basically like the receipts for everything and where things are spent, where money goes, so that they can like contest or like argue about like they want transparency where the money that they give studios is going in the production, which I think is a fairly reasonable thing to ask for. But there is another thing that they mention here, which is basically what I would call your mask off moment. Let's see if I can find the point here. While that studio's claims are dubious, the scandal raised important. So there was, this is about that. So management fees. I think they didn't know that one of the animes got outsourced to North Korea, which does have some animation studios out there, and sometimes they get outsourced for different productions. But they obviously, I guess Netflix wasn't really happy about that. So to improve standards in other relative industries, live action, they have a coordination with Japanese production aimed to promote a better harmony on set and respecting training, hold masterclass in Japan. So this is just some sort of like PR stuff, right? But if I remember right, they're basically saying that they want their receipts at some points. Yeah, contract transparency and standards, the Japanese motion picture production studio situation, and stuff about contracts being more open. And then there was a bit in here about unions. And this part to me really stood out. So the current nature of anime industry also means that a near majority of freelancer demographic is constantly moving from job to job. This is true. This has been true since the 80s, if not before, which the studios have struggled to keep track of. Katakawa, chief animation director, recently told Nikkei that he wanted the company to have a centralized contract system placed by 2025. So I don't know if they've done that or not. Successful contract case studies such as Dandelion Animation Studio, who were a co-production in the first Slam Dunk movie with Toei Animation. So they were the 3D CGI studio that worked with Toei Animation. Toei Animation has a lot of, salary staff and such. I guess they were using a similar system. The CEO spoke earlier this year about the positive effects of having a contract database. Netflix says general workers are protected better in the West than Japan. So this is the key point I wanted to bring up. Here is the point which I don't think they would have been able to mention, but I think this is just very telling of some of the comments they're going to make now and why they're not true. Netflix also has general workers are better protected in the West, highlighting the role of unions like SAG-AFTRA in securing pay raises and better conditions, opposed to expecting production committees and investors to distribute revenue more fairly. Now, what is Netflix saying here? That unions are good, actually? Crazy, right? That unions... Now, who has a union in the anime industry? Toei Animation. Who used to have a union in the anime industry? Mushi Productions. Most people don't know this. Mushi Productions had a union. It had a good union. So this is where like some of the claims that I'm going to cover in a second fall apart. Because most people in the West have no fucking clue that Mushi Productions had a union. And Mushi Productions animators were paid twice as well as the ones in Toei. And Toei animators were not paid badly in that period of time. So... What does Netflix then say after they let it slip that, yes, unions can actually get better pay for the people in, they have collective bargaining? They go, but however, Netflix argues that adopting this would not be effective in Japan, meaning Netflix doesn't actually want the anime industry or any Japanese industry to become unionized, because that would be a problem for their profit margins, and it means that it would be more difficult to work with these studios in their mind. Maybe I feel that they don't want that. Netflix's interest is not in animators unionizing. So in this document, they had to very specifically say, yeah, that really works in America, but some reason it won't work in Japan. No, don't think about that in Japan. Don't you think too long about unionizing. Don't get that in your mind. Stop thinking about that. It won't work in Japan for reasons. Reasons I won't give specifically, but reasons, which to me is like, that's crazy. That's just fucking that is fucking wild for Netflix to bring it up only to be like, but nuh-uh. Sorry, bro, nuh-uh. And then at least CBR had did their due diligence here, because they brought up Japan's NAFCA, which I think is one of the animation associations. Yeah, Animation Association Japan, and they argued the opposite. So basically they're saying like people who actually work in the industry as animators and people who work for them and with their interest in mind actually say that no, unions would actually be good. Nevertheless, both the skill level certifications are necessary to ensure more experience and talent. So I think Netflix has been like citing its idea of like having, some sort of training projects that it does with like young animators or some bollocks, some bullshit, right? That, Netflix can like pretend it's actually helping the industry when it's actually probably making it worse in some ways because of the demand.
Party over just to maintain their majority control.
Yeah, it's not within Netflix's interest to make the system better. They just want the outcome. They just want more anime, right? They want more stuff they realize that like for Gen C and millennials, anime is like quite a hot commodity in terms of like it gets an audience that's quite hard to get otherwise. So I think they really see the value of anime on their systems because of that. It has like a very specific like demographic that it's harder to hit with different shows. So they do have a lot of anime, and they know the watch time of these animes, and like some of those animes, even the older ones, like they have the substantial watch time. It's very impressive. If you look at the Naruto's, you look at the Pokemons, you look at what was the other one that was really big on Netflix? Might have been Dragon Ball. I don't know if Dragon Ball's actually on Netflix though in America or not. It's not here, I don't think. There was another one as well, but those two were really big. There's a lot of shows that are like there's like a huge percentage of this sort of stuff. JoJo was decently high, but it was not that high. It was the same as Attack on Titan. Attack on Titan and JoJo had very similar numbers, about 80 million watch hours a year or something like that. It could have been One Piece. One Piece was probably up there. I can't remember if that's on Netflix though. But anyway.
What can the people who draw the anime do about this? Nothing, because most of the time they're not even on it. And even if they don't have enough ownership to force the committee to raise more money. So they're put into a very pleasant position of having to make anime with pretty much no money. And they do make an anime.
I mean, sometimes anime studios will use this as a bit of an excuse. Like there is generally it is difficult, but I've heard Trigger say this, and I feel like Trigger is bullshitting when they said this, because I know that in one of Trigger's streams they were talking about like, it's nothing to do with us, bro, if we get paid poorly, if we pay our staff poorly, because it's the production committee. We don't have any say on that stuff. It's like, well, if they're salary workers, you do have a say on that. You do have a say on the salary. Don't pretend you don't. Like, bro, you can't just be like, all right, so I have salary workers here. They're supposed to be paid this amount a year, but like, yeah, we didn't actually make that much money this year, so we're not paying our salary workers there. You can't say that. That is against legal. There are labor laws in Japan. There are labor laws. There's the 1987 Act, which said that set down that Unfortunately, it did not do anything about overtime, but it set down that like on an average week, a salary worker should not be working more than 40 hours a week. And there has been newer stuff that came out recently in terms of like about freelancing. They've reinforced some freelancer rules about like not getting paid. Like the situation I'm bringing up now, where Trigger could be like, and by the way, this did happen. Trigger did do this. They didn't pay, I don't know if they were animators or production assistants, but there was a case a couple years ago where, you know what happened? Trigger didn't pay some staff members on a production, and you know what happened? They joined a union, temporarily, right? They joined a general union, and then they sued Trigger and won, and got their money back. And Trigger had to be like, I'm sorry we did this. We'll make sure that this doesn't happen again. Because they have to give like a fucking apology, and it came out to people because it was a legal case, and they lost it, and it became public. It was a public document, and Trigger had to be like, yeah, I guess we didn't pay them the money we were supposed to. Our bad. I guess we'll have. That's why I don't trust Trigger when they say this shit. But like, this is where I get a bit like, oh fucking hell, come on. So, all right, I'll let him go because I'm wasting time.
They have to. And once that anemically funded anime goes out, the production committee turns around and says, "Oh wow, you made this anime with no money. Clearly you're capable. So why don't we do it again?" This is what the Sakurako Keonbu actually is. The production committee.
It's a bit weird to bring up K-On! With that though, because when we talk about a studio like KyoAni is a studio that actually has quite a lot of pull in the production committee system, because KyoAni has really specific partners. KyoAni is partnered with a very specific station and their animation company, like their animation setup production. God, what fucking studio is it? What channel is it now? There's a very particular channel that they like work with pretty much on every one of the productions, and KyoAni is also a very invested member of the production committee. So usually when it comes to a production committee for KyoAni, they have more sway because they have not only a partnership with a TV studio, which they have a good relationship with, they are also putting their money in there too, like a good portion of their money. So because of that, they have more swing and control of the production. Now, KyoAni is probably a recipe where they have, like, I guess they have the funds to do that. They have the capital and the success to be able to, like, use their weight in money to their benefit. Because, I mean, we've seen it in multiple situations in terms of, like, them being able to push back time schedules. You know, after the tragedy with the fires, right, they were able to push their schedules back and take as much time as they need on certain productions. And, like, they don't release that much anime a year. They have a premiere model, basically, where KyoAni releases, like, 1 or 2 different productions a year. They don't, like, try and shotgun it and release lots of productions. They focus down on, like, 1 or 2, which they think will be fairly profitable for them. Science Saru, I do not know. Yeah, Asahi. They work with Asahi. Science Saru has problems as well. I mean, they've also been outed for having problems. They used to be known to be better. I don't know where they are now. I think it's kind of up in the air, but some of their problems seem to be directly related to their Netflix contracts. So again, I think Netflix giving them demanding contracts and them like taking on too many projects at once at one point was a problem for them, definitely. But I don't know how much money Science Saru has on its productions. I don't know if that's public knowledge. I know KyoAni does have a more stable position on that.
What it means to one single ed to make as much money as possible. But hold on a minute, let's not.
I mean, yeah, the money in the market is going
kind
up.
of scummy, but it's not like they're all evil mustache trolling villains.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter about the individual, right? It's about the system which exploits. This is just the capitalist system in terms of like, yeah, the profits are going to rise up unless you yourself can like stop that from happening. But it's the system. Like, it's not about the individual if they're a good or bad person. The system itself is kind of getting.
I mean, how many studios can you think of that can cough up the multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars that it costs to just produce one episode of anime? Let alone
There's a couple.
Millions it takes to produce an entire season. And don't forget, these anime that you watch, they're all a product of...
I mean, okay. So maybe I think he might have went past something that I was going to talk about, which I didn't get into fully. Do we know the legend of Mushi Production in the chat? Most people might know that Mushi Productions was like the first TV animation studio as we know it, and it went bankrupt a couple years into production. Does anybody in the chat know why Mushi Productions went bankrupt? Can we source Wikipedia to answer? Unfortunately, we probably can't, but I can source Anime Tude's blog post about the history of Mushi Productions, which has many sources in it. It's a really good history document. It has a lot of sources that are only from Japan in it, and a couple from France, which were translated from Japan. That is a really interesting document, because one of these pieces of information is public knowledge, which is, in 1968, a studio called Tezuka Productions was created by Tezuka. Why was Tezuka Productions created? Now, if I recall right, I think the history of Mushi Production series, as far as the alluding is that the union in Mushi Pro seemed to have a lot of power, and maybe enough power to push Tezuka out. And what Tezuka did is he moved money and IPs out of Mushi Pro and into a separate. So he was like, what I'm going to do is all my IPs that I own and where I'm going to make lots of money from because I own it and I can make the merchandise deals. And really the key here for a studio is owning your IPs. This is really the most powerful thing here. Is that if you own your IPs, you have much more control about royalties, where they're going, where things are happening, organizing contracts, which are more fair because it's your product and you can better do that. When you're working with something like Chainsaw Man, there are other parties already involved because it is a Shonen Jump property that you don't own. So you're already going to be taking cuts on things like merchandise. And where does animation make money from? It's usually everything else but the animation, right? You're going to be making money from live events, from movies, from merchandise. Merchandise is massive, right? You're going to be making money from tie-in games. You're going to be making money from like videos, from streaming, from on-demand services. You're going to be making money all over. Maybe you'll be making money from the music deal. You could be making money in all these different mediums. That's what the media mix is about, right? That's why you turn something into a franchise. That's how Kara exists, right? Kara has Evangelion's IP, and they can fucking put out merchandise for Evangelion forever, and they'll never really have to worry too much about money. So what do you think happened to Mushi Pro when they took all the IPs that made the money from toy commercials and candy stuff, right? So from like, well, I mean, Mushi Pro did make films targeted at adults. They made 3 of them. They made the Anirama trilogy. They were a bit too young to the battle because in theory their idea was correct. I mean, you could look at Fritz the Cat in America, right? Fritz the Cat did pretty well for an adult animation movie at that time, and maybe that's what they were. I don't think that was the main reason they were looking at, because I remember one of my booklets in the Anirama trilogy said that the main thing that they were targeting was the pink film audience. It didn't really work out, unfortunately. But like, those are very influential, important films. I would say mainly on Belladonna, but I think each of them are interesting in their own right, the trilogy. But they weren't financial successes, which probably doomed the studio, because, you know, when you put more money into a movie project and it doesn't do well 3 in a row, it's probably not going to end well for your studio. But when you lose the IPs, which what happened with Mushi Pro, right, you're going to have a problem. Also, here's the other issue, which I brought up before. Mushi Pro staff members. So this is where I think this argument about Tezuka being at fault makes no sense, because Mushi Pro staff members were paid incredibly well. They were paid so fucking. Again, the money you were paid at Toei for a key animation job was pretty good at the time at Toei Animation. I'm not saying it was amazing, but it was a decent salary for that kind of position. Much better than you're going to get, like, in terms of where we are now, right? And then to snipe the staff, Tezuka probably did more than he would have really needed to, and said, I'm going to double your wages, if not a little bit more. He doubled their wages. They had so much extra income. These a lot of young men, right? Young men who don't have a lot of, like, things they have paying for, right? What happened at the studio was, and this is in the Anitude's history of Mushi Pro, he also has an image of it. They started buying cars. Every key animator at Mushi Pro bought a car while working at the studio. Can you fucking imagine that? But their pay went up so substantially that they were all like, let me just buy a car. Like, just casually. They were like, yeah, I'm going to buy a car this week. And they all did that. Instead of taking the train or whatever. Or a bike or something like that. They were like, I'm going to buy a car. That's fucking insane. I mean, I've always heard that none of them did particularly well in terms of the Anirama trilogy. Maybe the 1001 did better than some, but I don't know. I'd have to look back into it. But, like, you got to think, like, they were getting... And do you know what also happened? Do you know what also happened? There's a studio called Madhouse. You know, we were talking about them earlier? How do you think Madhouse got made? Madhouse was founded by 3 animators and a production hand who might have just became a producer. Moriyama, right? But the other 3 members who founded the studio, Rintaro, director, key animator at the studio. Dasaki, director, I think he was just a director. I don't actually think Dasaki did his own animation, did he? But, you know, you had Rintaro, I think he had an animation background. So it was like, I think that it was animator / coming towards becoming a director, Rintaro. Then you had Dasaki, another director at the studio. Then you had a 3rd member, that was Kawajiri. He at that time was only, I think, a key animator. So you have these three dudes and Murayama, who I think at the time he was an assistant production hand, but he might have moved up to production. But like, you've got these four dudes, right? And they were like, yeah, we have enough disposable income to create a whole studio. We're just going to create a studio. We're just going to buy or rent out a building somewhere, and we're just going to be Madhouse now. Like, that's crazy. They could just do that. We're like, yeah, because of all the extra income, they could just be like, yeah, we're going to start a studio of our own now. Oh, was he an animator, was he? Okay, well, there you go. I think he became a director by that point, because he'd done Ashino Joe, and I think Rintaro was also worked on a couple of things by that point. But I'm pretty sure Kawajiri was not a director yet. He was just an animator. So why did Mushi Pro go under? Well, because all the IPs that made Mushi Pro profitable were moved into Tezuka Productions. You know who didn't go bankrupt? Tezuka Productions is still around to this day. Tezuka Productions still exists. It still makes animation. It still is just working as always. So, in theory, if Tezuka had never moved all those IPs into a different conglomerate, basically to like scoop them away, Mushi Pro would still be here today. It might have taken some losses with those films, but I think the money it would have made from Tezuka's IPs probably would have actually let it swim through. Because Tezuka Productions is still around to this day. And ironically, a lot of Tezuka Productions are actually very high animation count. They're not really very limited anymore. They tend to have a much like more refined animation count. I know who worked with Tezuka Productions a fair bit? Madhouse Studio. Madhouse Studio did several productions with Tezuka. All through decades, even. They worked on several adaptations of Tezuka's mangas, like Unico. They worked, I'm pretty sure was it them? No, it might have been TMS who did, I think TMS might have, I can't remember if it was TMS or Madhouse who did Blackjack, but there's definitely several Blackjacks out there. I feel like it was one of those two studios that worked on it. But Tezuka Productions also helped with Metropolis. 2001's Metropolis. That was Tezuka Productions and Madhouse again. That's 2000s. So all the way from the 80s into the 2000s, Tezuka Productions and Madhouse were working together still because of that relationship, on top of other things. So, like, it's business, baby. It's a lot of business. And let's get back to the video, I imagine.
Survivorship bias. These actually survived the process. Imagine the 90% of anime that get all this funding just to never be released.
So, yes, it would mean that from a business standpoint, it would be better to have originals. But originals are incredibly hard to get popular. It's difficult. It is very difficult to get an original anime that is also super successful, right? It's a shot in the dark. It is a complete shot in the dark. But, you know, studios try, but usually it doesn't work. But when it does, that's when it's like, oh, that's a big deal. You know, like Madoka.
Sorry about that. Advertisers want to make a lot of money by selling a lot of stuff to a lot of people, which means they'll pay more for ads to either reach a lot of people.
I mean, that was the original title. I think they've changed the title. This is, well, they might have changed it back in the day. Anyway, this was the title that they had in their source document, which is what I quoted here. Maybe they've changed it back today.
Doesn't have any money.
Had
the
two
shows
different
that are
names.
actually aimed at people who have money are aired at a time when most of them are asleep, which means advertisers won't pay that much unless it's an uber popular anime.
Yeah, I don't get the impression that Belladonna probably had much Tezuka, but that might have been because of the disputes with the workers.
They've gone to get the figures. This man in front of me literally just spent about $6 grand on $10,000.
$10,000.
I mean, merchandise is quite high, especially the last couple of years. Merchandise in the anime industry has been definitely a really big part of the mix. It has been.
Just like how Tezuka put his bets on the power of otaku, so do modern production committees, who invest the majority of their money not into making the anime, but getting the word out about the anime and making all the merch that anime fans gobble up.
I mean, merch has been a big part of animation since the beginning, so it's not like this is new or anything like that. Merch is definitely a really formative part in most of like the animation industry in general. It always has been. But like, yeah, obviously media mix is more effective at selling it though, because then you can sell all kinds of media to like different merch to different people or different media, different people. You know, it's like
through a strange turn of events has resulted in this. Do you notice something wrong? Why is this deep?
Okay, actually, so it's interesting you say about the manga. This is a kind of, it's a half truth about anime is nothing more than a big ad for the manga. Not necessarily, but this idea that an anime can make a manga more profitable comes from Dr. Slump in 1982. When Toei made Dr. Slump in 1982, I think it was doing pretty well as a manga, but after the anime came out, which had really good really good ratings on Fuji TV. Like, we're talking 30% plus on Fuji TV. So Dr. Slump was a very popular television show, and that got, that kind of broadened the audience away from just manga readers, and it it basically made Toriyama into a millionaire. That's generally the consensus, is that like Dr. Slump made Toriyama into a millionaire, and the anime was definitely a factor in making the show making the manga even bigger, because it proved that there is a correlation between a very successful like TV show and also making the manga more well known. But like, yeah, it's not necessarily in a factor. It could be seen as an advertisement, but I think there's more to it than that. I think it can be a bit more multifaceted than that, because there's no guarantee that the anime will be successful if the manga itself isn't already a success, right? That like there's like, you try. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it does work. Of course, if it's incredibly popular already, if we're talking about a manga that is like super popular already, then you probably can guarantee the anime will do all right. But actually, here's an interesting one, right? Chainsaw Man. Chainsaw Man was not a failure, right? It did well, but Mappa expected Chainsaw Man to do better than it did, because they wanted it to do Jujutsu Kaisen numbers, and it just didn't. But the manga of Chainsaw Man is, for its size, it does pretty well for its space. It is actually a pretty successful, at the time that the anime was about to come out, it had like 8 spots on the top comic book chart in America. 8 spots in the top chart. That's crazy. That's like the whole top 10. I mean, yeah, when we think about media mix, right? Sometimes it's more about the franchise itself. So the manga is one element of that multimedia franchise, and then the anime is another one. And, it sort of builds up when you're thinking of like in terms of like a big, when you're thinking of franchising something, it's not just the one thing, it's the everything, right?
DVDs so expensive. The price of anime DVDs have always looked kind of ridiculous to me. You want me to pay almost $50 for a part of a season of an anime that I can just watch online for free? I mean, through verified online streaming sites? And beyond that, people don't buy DVDs anymore.
Depends. In America, I think it's probably more likely that people will be buying home releases than they are in Japan. From what I remember hearing, there is an industry there for a reason. I do think that the industry, depending where you live, can kind of fuck you over on the prices. And like, it feels a bit like gouging, especially when like, I fucking hate the idea of paying for like part of a show instead of like the whole show. I think that's kind of ridiculous myself. But it does depend. Obviously, yeah, home media is starting to be seen a little bit more like a dinosaur, but it's not necessarily on the way out completely. There's reasons that like in America that there's still, companies that are selling this stuff like G-Kids, who also do cinema releases, and like Anime Ego and Discotek, and I guess Crunchyroll still functions now in some form of doing that, I guess. Maybe the sake of it. And then Sentai. There is, at least in America, there are definitely still a lot of studios that are out there to sell you home releases. So like, it's still here. I don't know if it's going to go away that quickly.
Sweet, because I have a lot. I have a few hundred.
Well, as it turns out, people still do. And in fact, anime DVDs are like this MacBook Pro stand, a luxury item.
I mean, the manga version of Nosuka is very good.
The people buying is enough to outweigh all the lost profit from the people who don't. In fact, in the good old days, anime DVDs used to make so much profit that it's propped up entire studios before.
I don't know where he got that information from. I don't know where that information is from, everyone. I have seen the chart from the anime industry like report, and I saw the money that TV anime like DVDs used to make studios specifically, and it certainly was higher in the 2000s for sure, but I don't know if it was even the biggest part of the sandwich. Let's say it was definitely a factor, a pretty strong factor, but also like one factor of many. So I don't know where they've got this idea from. I think it is a common misconception that like you can win it off that. But again, it would also come down to like, do they own the property we're talking about? Because if you don't own the property you're talking about, you're going to get cuts. And you remember, all right, back in the day when Evangelion came out, right? One of the things the staff members said about the production committee is that like, we were getting fucked. Our rates were terrible. But the thing is, Evangelion just sold so much it didn't matter. That's why we were making money, because like our royalty rates fucking sucked, but it sold like 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 4 million fucking unit. It sold like 3 million laserdiscs and God knows how many DVDs. Like it sold millions of copies. So in the end, that added up to like money. And I think that deal back then also meant that at some point, as we know, Anno got the rights back to Evangelion. So I think they had a deal in the contract where like the production committee had some ownership of the IP for a certain amount of time in terms of people like King Records. And I think King Records is still technically involved to some degree. But I think that the rights eventually did go back to the studio Gainax and then Takara so that they own it broadly. But I'm not sure what King Records deal with that is. It might just be the music now, I'm not sure. But I think that the deal eventually went that they own the IP rights and eventually that money contract would be renegotiated or whatever. Because now Kara controls the merchandising. It's not like, anyway, you know, they're in control of it all. I mean, Evangelion was pretty popular everywhere, to be fair. But yeah, Japan particularly did they sold a lot of Evangelion there. But again, when we're talking about piracy as well, like I mean, it's hard to really quantify the impact of piracy because, you know, a lot of pirates wouldn't have bought it anyway. So it becomes a bit more debatable about how it can affect things. Obviously, if you could hypothetically remove all piracy possibilities for the consumer, maybe some of them would like bite the bullet and start buying stuff, but like that's a hypothetical that's not going to exist.
Those good old days are over. Because nowadays, most anime is watched through streaming services like Crunchyroll and Netflix, who the committee requires pay a few $1,000s minimum per anime episode in an attempt to recoup production costs. An attempt that's usually...
I don't know where they're getting this thousands
did I mention
per
that
episode,
anime is getting so
because usually they pay a lot more than that.
Companies are going into debt, which lends itself to the unfortunate realization that, yeah, your life is probably worth less than Orihime or El Manga Sensei is worth to the production committee.
If you're doing shotgunning, probably, because if you just try and release as many anime as possible...
anime goes to the committee first as well, because they are the ones that technically own the anime. Because anime is a stock.
Well, this is what I'm saying about ownership is really important.
Stock get to reap the profit of it. Besides, the creators involved in the project already got paid up front. Not our problem if they went over budget. Which means even if an anime is a big hit, sometimes the anime studio doesn't get a single penny. Knowing all this would explain why, even though the anime production industry has...
They have tried to find new ways. They have, I know of recent years, they have tried to find new ways of which they can kind of recoup costs in different ways, which is where you get like those live events and cinema showings and stuff. And I think live events are actually pretty lucrative, or more so lucrative than they have been in the past for studios specifically, if you look at the newer reports. But I think they definitely have looked for different ways of different avenues for them to try and like recoup costs. But obviously, like, when the production committee system is the devil itself, as Oshii once said.
The anime distribution industry have reached all-time highs because they're either paid on their own terms or through being on the production committee, not starved of money and also getting the profits last, which makes anime studios mass outsourcing work to lower wage countries like China or the Philippines seem a lot more reasonable. Well, it would be more reasonable if it made everyone's life easier, but it doesn't. Because now with workers spread out all over the world,
I mean, this has been the case for a long time.
Coordinate this ginormous border-transcending system to match the week-on-week deadlines that someone decided the anime industry should move at.
I mean, outsourcing animation has been like a constant in the animation industry for a really long time. And even in Japan, there has been outsourcing. Some of it, they didn't like to tell you about it. So I do have a certain article that I will reference right now, and it will be in the document. From Macadamia 9, South Korea and the sub-empire of anime, kinesthetics and subcontracting of anime productions. This article basically says that there was a time when a lot of South Korean animators and other animators in the industry were not credited by their Korean name, right? But they were given fake Japanese names to not give the perception that the Japanese company was outsourcing their workload. This happened in the 80s. And probably in the 70s. And, you know, outsourcing generally is usually considered to have started in some fashion from the late 60s onwards. But you can go back even further to the war propaganda cartoons, specifically Momotaro. The original the theatrically lengthed Momotaro had outsourcing to imperialized nations, which is very uncomfortable to talk about because it's basically it is literally slave work. It's, you know, you're getting people that you've imperialized to work as in-betweeners on this animation, which is pretty fucked up. But, you know, that's maybe a topic for a different day. But it is just, this has been a concept very, it's been around for a long time, and the reasons are multifaceted. They don't necessarily have to do with the production committee, but it has been the case for a long time, and yes, the wages specifically to those places is not great. But of course, what we're talking about in general is not great, because we're talking about systemic issues opposed to just individual.
Because at the end of the day, give a studio all the money they want, but it's never gonna...
The thing about Nadia wasn't actually outsourced to Korea necessarily. It had work done in Korea, but that's because Korea was a partner. It's a co-production. So it's not even that it is I'll do this quick. In 1992, Korea had banned all anime. All Japanese products, in terms of media, were banned. There was one way to get around that. If you were in a co-production with a Japanese studio, you could air that animation on television. So, Nadia was shown in Korea. Some of the production was done in Korea, in terms of like in between. Some animation work was done there, and also processing, I think, was done there. So there was like a mix between them. But that loophole meant that Nadia could be played in Korea when, at that point in 1992, that would have been illegal. That would have not been possible otherwise. And yeah, Korea is like a massive animation house in its own right at this point. Korea is the world's animation house in a lot of ways, and they have to be a chameleon in that way. They have to animate in the way of the Americans. They have to animate in the way of the Japanese. They have to animate in the way of the Europeans. Like, they are so involved in so many different productions. I can't talk about their wages because that's a completely different industry in terms of like if their wages are good or bad. It might vary depending on the studios, etc. And they probably have their own problems.
Never comes out.
Never comes out. Did I miss something?
The final season of Attack on Titan is kind of a joke. Delays on top of delays have turned the finale of Isayama's story into perhaps the only real-life example of an infinite fractal. And for a series where the final season was handed off from the incumbent WIT Studios to Mappa solely because WIT was having some behind-the-scenes chaos, it's just how? I'm serious, how?
Yeah, but I think WIT just didn't want to take the project because of the time. I'm pretty sure that WIT made the decision in the end because of the schedule being bad that they didn't want to do it and they had other stuff to do. So, we had a couple bad years, but like what animation studio doesn't? But I think they got re-absorbed into Production IG or something. But I don't know if that was anything to do with Attack on Titan exactly. But anyway,
amounts have these kinds of production issues, especially when the employees are working so many hours that is being compared to literal slavery. Well, let me ask you a question.
There is a massive problem there.
Animator working on some no-name anime,
but I think the story he was looking at there. This is probably the problem when we're talking about citations here. Is I think that story might have actually been about a production hand, not an animator. But animators do also work incredibly long hours. I think it's generally anyone in that industry. If you're a production assistant or you're a production hand or a production runner, then like your time schedule might be even worse than the animators. Especially because you've got to run around and get the animation from them.
These are working so many hours that is being compared.
So senior employees are disgusted to quit. This month I worked average of 12. I think this was actually a production hand, this story here, but I can't remember because he's not putting the source on the fucking screen.
The literal slave.
I think that story's from Is that the one from Madhouse? Is that the story from Madhouse? Because I think that came out a couple years back.
Let me ask you a question. If
that was about
were
production assistants.
Animator working on some no-name anime, would you keep working at these amazing wage rates? What about like twice over? Thrice over? How about 10 times over? No, I'm being completely serious.
Not only is VA and sound work done before the animation is completed.
Before the animation is I think he means after. I think he's got it the wrong way around there. I think the voice work is done after. In America, you do the voice work beforehand so you can sync it to it. But in Japan, usually the animation is kind of just done in a rough state, and then at some point, when it's in its rough state, and sometimes in a bit more, then that's when the voice actors come in. Especially like if we're talking about like a movie production, yeah, the audio is always done last.
Meaning studios have to rush out a rough draft for the VAs before then going back and then remaking everything for real. If you look closer at the production system chart that was somehow legibly translated from a 240p picture, you realize that
this is the part I have a bit of this section especially I have problems with.
The vast majority of the blocks here are literally just checking if things are done right and then redoing them over and over again, which, even though it works, pisses off literally everyone involved in making.
Pisses off everyone in the making process. You're going to have to quantify that because the argument he's making here is not the argument he probably should be making about this, because he's talking about the modern system, which is a byproduct of the conditions. It's not like they created a system like this and everyone's like, why is there so much checking? Why is it so complicated? No, the system is the way it is right now as a response to the current conditions and needing people to be checked. But also, like, it is important to check stuff because if you don't, everything does need to be checked at some point, because how can you get to the next stage of the production if things aren't checked and there's something wrong with it? And it would create a catastrophe, right? If it's like, okay, so this key animation, it's not finished, like there's a bunch of frames missing and I'm supposed to like correct them, or I'm supposed to be this was like the rough layout, but it's not right. and half of the sequence is missing from what I'm supposed to be using, and then it's because someone didn't check it or someone got lost, and now you have to go find it. Like that's going to create even more problems. Like there's a reason that there's a system such in place.
Higher-ups, the entry-level workers, the production committee, or even the audience, forced to watch as the system hemorrhages time away as it's stuck looping the same track over and over again, creating an uncontrollable crisis that forces
this is a side effect. This is not the reason that's like that. It's a side effect. It's a side effect of like the layout crisis and stuff like that.
Somewhere reaches their
because anime in general is a lot looser in the amount of workforce it has, and like the way its chain is. It tends to be a lot looser with less cogs than, say, for example, the American system. It is a streamlined system. Now you could talk about like how there are problems with the system in terms of like now having to have these sort of cleanup stages where it's like you got the second key animation and then you got cleanup, and it seems like there is a bit of rotation there, but that's probably because of the situation of having animators that come on board who are not fully trained and then have to be corrected and adjusted and corrected and adjusted. Like usually, if you had a system where everyone was like talented in-house staff, you wouldn't need to do so much like spinning because you would trust in the people. Yeah.
In 2019, a Madhouse employee sued the company after working nearly 400 hours of unpaid...
So I think this is a story that he brought up a second ago, which I said, yeah, I remember, it's the Madhouse. So this was a production runner. It was a production runner who did this, so it isn't actually an animator. Now, it's not to say, again, that animators don't work ridiculous hours, it's true, but the 300 hours plus overtime shit... many of the stories that came out during this period, because Madhouse had one, 4C had one, Trigger had one. I think Trigger might have been animators, but 4C and Madhouse were production runners or animation runners. These are the people who don't actually animate, but the people who have to keep an eye on the schedule and then collect people's animation and keep on top of everything, right? Those are the people that were running these kind of insane hours. So I think that's important to be clear about.
Overtime in 1 month, doing the very important job of coordinating this ginormous.
Okay, so he seems to emphasize. He's saying it. I would just make sure. Yeah, he's the coordinator.
Materials to studio employees. The consequences of this broken.
I mean, sometimes. I mean, you can email that stuff now. You can, in theory, depending. It depends.
Is it really that surprising? I mean, the most obvious consequence of how
it was how. In general, the production, like being an animation runner, is a hellish job and has been considered such since. Probably forever. Like I have stories from Topcraft, from one of the books I bought for when I was doing the Cat in the Sky video, which talked about animation running at Topcraft during Cat in the Sky and after Cat in the Sky, and how it was so bad at times. Bro literally started bursting out into tears in the car park. It was like just fucking like it was that fucking brutal. He just fucking starts crying. He's just like, oh, like literally just pure pain, pure exhaustion, pure like just what the fuck am I doing? Yeah, I mean things haven't really changed there, unfortunately. I mean, maybe some places it's better. I don't know. It's hard to say.
It's such a huge production system.
But again, this is the problem. There's such huge. No, this is not a huge production system. This is actually the streamlined version of it. This is the streamlined animation version of it. And yes, there are some issues here, but they come from you're putting the cart before the horse. The issue is not having trained staff, having too many productions on at the same time, and not having the animators in your production because of the drain. And some of that might be wages. Some of that could be the conditions are really bad and you lose animators that way. There are a lot of factors involved in that. Some of that could be the splintering of the production. Now it's not all in one studio where people get taught and learn and become a sum of their parts, right? And it's splintering, and you've got freelancers over here, you've got freelancer over there, and that there isn't that like studio system which teaches and reinforces that in the same way as it used to be. Like there's so many factors here which have caused this problem, and a lot of that is probably demand of the industry, and that there's just too much need, and then a lot of that drain is also going to come from like the biggest studios being able to get the best talent and sucking them away and bringing them, like getting their schedule. It's like, if you're a Toei Animation or something, you probably got a good way of trying to get as many popular good animators as you can on your productions. And yeah, if you're one of these bigger studios, right, you can like not only your titles might be alluring to these animators, but you try and like grab the ones that you can because you've got the money to do so.
Is that there are so many points of failure. One delay anywhere, whether it's because the director overslept,
yeah, I mean, obviously,
injury or some outsourced person.
Depending on the area, like the wages probably aren't going to be good. But I think when it's the potential of being like one of the best freelancers in like Japan means you're probably getting paid much better than most people. If you're like I think the issue is that a lot of times they're talking about like junior salaries, like people who just came into the industry having these issues with salary, and salary is a big problem. Now, if you have a union like Toei, you're probably in a better state than some places, and that's kind of a key here, which is ignored a little bit with this, with the whole, you know, Netflix being like, you don't need unions, but like, you know, unions can you know what Toei has? Toei has a minimum hour cap, or like a maximum hour cap, let's say. If you are a salary animator at Toei, your hours are capped. You are not allowed to work. If you are on salary, legally, you are not allowed to work more than, I assume it's probably a 40-hour contract. So like, that is part of the union. The union got that passed. And there was problems with it at first because of scheduling. But I think as the years went by, they've actually got on top of it now. And I think that it's in a better place. Though I don't have in contact positions with people at Toei, but I have heard that they got on top of it a bit better, because at first the issue was like, well, now we just have less time to do everything and the schedules aren't going to compensate for that. But I think they have gotten better on it, because this happened in like 2018, so it's been a good 7 years since the systems came into place. And obviously I don't think Toei's perfect, they have problems, but you know, this is better to have this than not, is really my position.
And is late on delivery. One delay cascades down the entire.
And yes, Toei does outsource about 70% of their labor. I think a lot of that has to do with like in-betweening, coloring, backgrounds, etc. Like they have a Philippine studio. Toei Philippines does a lot of the work on their stuff, but I think a lot of that's to do with, again, cleanup, digitization, coloring, backgrounds, in-betweens. Maybe some sort of also animation sometimes, but like they have a sort of workhorse studio in the further east, I think you'd say. Is it further east from Japan? I don't know. I'm not going to pretend my geography is any good.
Causing everything behind it to get even further behind. The worst part is,
I mean, I think we're a little far. I think we are far away from the 30-hour animation studio week in Japan. You might, maybe in England, maybe in America, but I don't think you're going to get that in Japan. You know, the revolutionary concept of the last Ghibli movie was that they have to go home at 7 p.m. every night, and that they probably get the whole weekend off. So that's probably a 40-hour-ish week. That was the revolution of Ghibli's latest movie, right? That was like, they get to go away for the whole weekend, and they work until this hour. That's when they have to go home. They're not allowed to be at the studio any longer. So like, you know, just like basic things that a lot of studios do nowadays. Oh yeah, no crunch.
They kind of brought this one on themselves too. With nearly every studio being in Tokyo and pay rates being not so great, many employees are forced to work on multiple jobs, in multiple projects, sometimes in multiple companies.
Yes, this is true. This is to do with freelancers, and this is really Reaganomics in the end, right? This is the gig economy. This is the gig economy in action, and this has been a problem since the 80s, if not before, sure. Like, I had that article from Oshi where he's talking about mid-80s, right? It's like 86, that article came out, and he's like, yeah, the money that the freelancers are getting paid is not good, and there's problems here, and we need to do something about it, and like, you know, nothing really got done about it. Like, there are certain places where income goes up, for sure. I know that, you know, there are definitely positions, I think, where income, because of demand, has gone up, so like, I think income needs to go up in certain places, and again, I think some of it has to do with skill level, because if you're an in-betweener, you're kind of fucked, right? That's penny pay, but like, getting paid per cut is not good. I think this is the thing where like salary has a huge benefit, in that like getting paid per cut, it makes you, you know, chop slavey, chop. That's the mentality. But if you're getting paid a flat salary, it's like, well, you don't have to worry about chop because it's like every cut takes however it takes whatever it takes.
This set of circumstances means that every single time an anime upload deadline rolls around, that there's an ungodly crunch hour where employees are trying to make up for so much lost time that they can't eat or sleep or even go home.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is a massive problem. We can all agree with that. Though I think Nier Automata takes probably the correct path, but they just like postpone the show. Because instead of I think the path of like saying, okay, well, there's no way we can get this out on this schedule, so we should just freeze the show, and then when it's ready, we'll put it out again. I think that is the logical conclusion, instead of working yourself to death. Now, they may still have worked themselves to death. That's definitely possible, right? But like, I think that the conclusion of shit, we don't have an episode for next week shouldn't be, let's try and crunch the mad. It probably will be, okay, we'll probably just postpone the production then. Like, not ideal, but like that is what it is.
Because it's not like episodes are worked on one by one. They're worked on in batches of 3 or 4, which means if a delay happens...
I don't know where he's got that information from exactly. I mean, I guess it depends on the studio schedule. Usually you want to be 3 or 4 episodes ahead. So yeah, I guess probably there are multiple ones are going at once, but you probably have different teams on each of those episodes. It's probably not exactly the same team. It depends on their schedule, right?
It's not just merely one episode off schedule. It's a third of the season. With all this pressure and chaos coming down on
again, I don't know where he's getting where it's from a specific article or like what's he quoting here, or is he making a conjecture?
Are done with this bullshit and decide to just disappear in the middle of the production process, making everything worse.
I mean, freelancers are flaky by nature.
Different. That they, the government, or something will come in and fix this abomination of a system that exploits their passions and dreams to basically voluntarily enslave them.
But at the end of the day,
I mean, that is a lot of creative industries.
Because the struggle to make anime a good place to work has been fought for decades upon decades by some of the most venerable names in Japanese history. And
I think this is... I don't think we need to be bringing them up by name, if I'm honest. I think a lot of these people do not have a good reputation on their labor relations to varying degrees, and I don't think... Otsuka's fine. Kon, Takahata, Miyazaki are not the people you should be bringing up in terms of labor relations, positive figures. Absolutely not.
Nothing has changed. Because while our story may have started with The Promised Neverland, the true story stretches far into the past. Almost 100 years back to modern anime's birth, when one war ended and another began.
I don't know if we need to be talking about the bomb right now.
At the end of the Second World War,
I don't think we need to be talking about the bomb.
Everything about the country. That included a concept that most Japanese had never heard of before.
Oh god, okay. No, this is not true. This is not true. Okay, this is really wrong. This is incredibly wrong. Okay, you can go to any Japanese labor site. I think I had one here. That is not true at all. I have a document somewhere here in my thing, and I have the numbers in front of me. From 1870 to 1910, in Japan, there were 1,000 disputes and strikes. 1,000. The idea that this is a foreign concept to the Japanese in 1940 is simply untrue. They did get more. There were more disputes as time went on. It is true. In, I believe it was, 1940s? By the 1940s, half of Japan's labor force was unionized. And no, that was not an effect of the fucking Americans. The Americans said they were going to make union stronger in Japan, but you know what happened? The Cold War. So they decided not to do that. So they did not strengthen, to my knowledge, they did not particularly strengthen the labor laws in Japan during the occupation. It was something that they had alleged they might do, but they ended up not doing. So this reading is incorrect in every way.
And I mean, it's not too hard to see why labor...
Also, the last data set I saw in passing, there might be newer data sets in this, about unionization in Japan, said in 2010, 20% of the labor force was still unionized. 20%. So take that in mind. Take that in mind in a second when we get to what he's about to say.
Unions were kind of foreign to the Japanese. In a country where harmony and the respect of...
the average TV anime, which is one core, will probably cost around 300 million yen, give or take. Can depend on a lot of factors, but the modern conception of it is probably about 300 million yen now, somewhere around 2-point-something million dollars for a one core. Obviously the costs could probably be decreased if you were running it longer with more salary stuff. It can obviously vary. There's a lot of variation. You'll probably see a lot of different stats. You know, back in the day they used to say one core was 1 million back in like 2012, but I think the cost of running a show has gotten higher. For multiple factors, including the demand of like getting staff and other factors in terms of what you need to run the show. So the cost went up. If you go for a Netflix show, an ONA, those things are generally considered to cost more as well than a TV show. So those tend to have more money, but if that money is allocated to Netflix is another question. So yeah.
Hierarchy was the norm for like a lot of years. A ragtag group of subordinate employees getting together and demanding something from their boss was something people just would not do.
That's just not true. That's not true. Again, sorry, I have to go back for a second. Did he just say...
Hierarchy.
Well, all right, so I think I missed this bit. I blanked out. My brain went
concept that
numb.
Most Japanese had never heard of
because I was talking.
Collective bargaining. And
again,
not
untrue.
Too hard to see why labor unions were kind of foreign to the Japanese.
Why would they be?
Where harmony and the respect of hierarchy was the norm for.
No, that's propaganda. That is propaganda. That is 70s propaganda from the ultra nationalists. That is not true. Japan was not even a nation until like 200 years ago. It was like a bunch of enclaves. The concept of the nationhood of Japan did not exist until like fucking 200 years ago.
like a lot of years. A ragtag group of subordinate employees getting together and demanding something from their boss was something people just would not.
Yes, they would. Yes, they did. They did. They did this. This happened. Like, if you believe in a collective community, which again is a little bit debatable if we want to get into the details. Let's take, for example, that the idea of Japan back in the 40s, whatever, fairly communal area, fairly communal community, right? There's a lot of people involved in the general community who live around them and whatever, and they care about them. If you care about other people in your community, why would you not strike for better pay for everyone? This argument only makes sense if you're an individualist. And you're like, no, fuck you, I got mine. Like, the argument for a collective bargaining makes more sense if you have the idea that you care about your community and you care about other people on top of yourself, because you want them to have better conditions as well as yourself. So, like, that's not foreign at all. That's like, there's a misconnect here between these like theories he's bringing up.
Inevitably, though, the concept began to see adoption, and in 1961, anime's first labor union was formed, the Toei Animation Labor Union.
Yes.
Remember Toei? And to be fair to the union, they actually did quite a lot. Founded by people involved in the production of Lupin III, and eventually coming to involve a very impassioned...
when they left Toei, yeah.
Chief secretary by the name of Hayao Miyazaki.
Miyazaki was kind of thrown into it. I actually think you might want to look at Tezuka, maybe. Or not Tezuka, Takahata first, because I think Miyazaki's was more so ended up in the position because it was friends.
Union fought tooth and nail, winning concession after concession after concession, but they were on borrowed time. Toei had already started hiring out domestic freelancers in place of permanent employees, making unionization more difficult. 2 years later, Tezuka propped up this weekly upload norm and...
Again, remember that he doesn't know this, but Mushi Pro had a union. A strong union, they had better wages. Tezuka did not destroy the union. I mean, maybe he attempted to. I don't know. It's hard to say. I'd have to read back into the details. But maybe in removing all the money from Mushi Pro, he set them up to fail because he didn't want to deal with the union anymore. I'm not sure.
Then anime started to get really expensive, to the point where...
Well, Miyazaki never even brought up a union, though. Like, Miyazaki had Ghibli... You know, Ghibli was a mercenary state at first, but it did become a full-on studio by, like, 92, right? There was never even a conversation about having a union at Ghibli. There never has been. So, like, I mean, practice what you preach at that point. It's like, I don't think he really believed in the union that strongly. Like, he just said that, conditions are just better at Ghibli, I guess. We pay more, maybe. But, like, I mean, it's still good to have a union, but they don't. They don't.
By the time the 70s rolled around, Toei, along with some other anime studios, were hundreds of millions of yen in debt, and Toei decided to conveniently...
Don't know where he's getting that information from. Is that from Wikipedia? Oh, that's fucking Wikipedia again, isn't it? Oh, okay. Okay. There was definitely a period where Toei... This did happen. Toei did... This in the anime history, which I have my little tablet. Where's my tablet over here? Yeah, in anime history, they did talk about this. I'm pretty sure that they tried to fire a bunch of people in the 70s.
Workforce. As you'd expect, people were pissed.
I think the union fought against it, and some of them got back.
18 of 170 layoffs, 150
I think they mentioned it here.
Whether laid off or not, permanently left, including 2 friends who went on to establish...
They did not leave because of that, though. They were forced out of the company. Takahata left because he was kind of like blacklisted after Horus, and Miyazaki left with him. So they left together, and they left together in like 1970 or 71. So like they left pretty quickly. I think the last one actually maybe Takahata had left first. I'm trying to remember the details because there's like 4. There was Kobe, there's Kotabe, Otsuka, right? Takahata and Miyazaki. These people all left the studio at some point. They all ended up joining different places. I think they all kind of ended up joining in the Lupin studio originally, the original studio there, and they were getting paid pretty good. I think they left also because they got paid better at this other place. I think that was also a factor here, that like they were getting good money when they moved.
Studio called Ghibli. After this, the situation only got worse.
Well, that's fucking 14 years in the future. Jesus Christ, that was a whiplash.
With anime expenses getting higher and higher, a studio called Sunrise would pioneer the concept of international outsourcing.
That is not true at all. I do not know where this claim came from. I've looked through his sources before. I have no clue where he got this idea that Sunrise popularized outsourcing. It was already happening by the late 60s. I do not know where he's got this idea from. I'm like flabbergasted. I don't know. I do not know. I don't know. Okay.
When it produced Mobile Suit Gundam.
I don't even know if Mobile Suit Gundam even has any outsourcing in it. Maybe it does. I haven't looked at the fucking credits, but I don't know where he's got this idea from at all. What is he talking about? Where is Gundam outsourced? Again, you probably wouldn't even know because they wouldn't tell you. That's the thing, right? They wouldn't tell you. They'd give them fake Japanese names. Like if you go on like AniDB or something, or one of these anime sites, and you find a bunch of dead names that have like Japanese and no other credits, they're probably Korean people with fake names. But maybe some of the other Japanese names there are also fake people who were actually just Koreans.
And as more and more of the industry turned into independent contractors now scattered all across the world, union organization became more and more untenable. And
this is true in the American industry for sure. This is how the American industry kind of killed their union force in animation. But it's complicated, right? There are still studios that animate in America and make animation in America. And some of them are unioned, like Titmouse. I'm pretty sure they unionized recently, didn't they? I don't know. I don't keep up with the American industry. But like, yes, outsourcing was a good way for them to like both cut down the costs and also avoid union pressure. But that doesn't work in this context. When we talk about the anime industry, there are things that outsource, but generally key animation is still done mostly in Japan. Like there are freelancers that are international, yes. But like those members who work on these productions, there is a core of them who are needed from Japan, and they can't replace them. And I don't think they want to replace them. You're talking about a different industry when you're talking like this.
Production committees and the horrible working conditions of the modern anime industry began to solidify. The first generation of animators decided to try one more time to save what they loved so dearly, aimed at appealing the one actor that had more power than the companies did: the government. And to be clear, J-Anika, a union founded by old people like Toyo Ashida and Satoshi Kon, was initially just aiming for guaranteeing retirement benefits, nothing more. But as the years rolled on and the working conditions of the anime industry were leaked to the Japanese public, the union gathered more and more members.
I don't know if that actually affected that, because everyone in the industry would already know about that. Again, this is Wikipedia again.
To do, including getting this.
I mean, Japanese Animation Creator Association is a labor group, but I don't actually think they're a technical. I don't think they're a technical union. So I don't think they're not. I don't think they are a practicing union. I think they're a labor. I think they're a labor group who try and fight for better rights for animators, but I don't think they're actually technically a union that can have like collective bargaining and stuff.
Support of the government of Japan.
Yeah, guild is probably a good word.
Stay in power for long. And Janika's proposals were cancelled, being cited as a waste of taxpayers' money. While Janika would continue its efforts valiantly, it had reached its peak. Infighting and an unsupportive government doomed any future efforts. The union's
I'm pretty sure they still exist. Pretty sure they're still around, aren't they? Maybe not Janika, but there's a Japanese Association of Animators, I think, still around.
Would come with a project that translates to anime's future.
Huh?
Proposed to the Department of Cultural Affairs, the entire project's premise was that if you paid people more people will want to come and work. Come on, guys. Really? But for one reason or another, Anime Mirai didn't prove to be successful enough to continue. And the entire
Okay, so again, where is this from Wikipedia again? If you appeal every year with just a small increase in wages, you can make this high quality and interesting animation, and the skills of the newcomers will be improving in a way to make... I mean, look, MAPPA was offering some pretty big contracts to people when they were working on Chainsaw Man. Like, those contracts, in terms of the money they were offering, that I heard about from people who actually ended up joining, the salary positions were actually like getting paid pretty highly, but it doesn't mean the conditions were any good. I mean, most probably aren't there, because MAPPA also has a bad reputation with freelancers, but I don't know, salaries are a different thing.
Program was given to the
I mean, I think salaries have went up, but maybe not enough. I think that's generally the position that, and also that there's a lot of positions in the industry that are like paid really badly because they are things like in-betweeners and such, in terms of like you're getting paid per frame or whatever.
Japanese Animation Association, a group of 38 of the biggest animation companies in Japan, who coincidentally decided to switch the premise of the program. The anime industry now reaching 90 years old, and Janika's original founder now dead.
I mean,
most of the old guard took their leave, with nothing to show but blood and defeat in a war that lasted.
Well, it's not really defeat though, because like the whole point of like fighting for better labor rights is it's a continuous battle. You don't stop fighting. Like, you might fail and lose some battles, but the entire point of like a labor movement is that you keep moving. You don't go like, oh fuck, we lost it this time, I guess we just give up forever. That's that's not the point. Like, come on.
The men and women that had built and fought for anime.
My god.
Their love. Their life.
Kon has been accused of not being necessarily the best, but kind of scary guy at times, and not necessarily being the nicest environment for some of his work. So I don't know if we should be necessarily holding up 100%. Like, you know, he could be even Honda. You know, Mr. Honda himself. Is it Takeshi Honda? He said that like in an interview a couple of years back before he'd passed. I think he said working with Kon, it was scary, and I'm like, fucking hell, Kon. Like, this is, you know. Honda is like a master anime, and he's like, actually, being around Honda, being around It's kind of funny. This man has worked with Miyazaki on multiple projects. 3 projects he's worked with Miyazaki in depth. He was the main animation director on that last project. And I guess maybe back then he'd only worked with him once, I think, by that time of that interview. But like, I mean, that doesn't sound good. I don't know if that sounds good. If you like, legacy. Takeshi Honda, isn't it? He's Gainax boy.
Finally.
This is superfluous. It doesn't matter if he got a fucking honorary Oscar. He didn't go to the first one because of the fucking Iraq War. It's regardless. It's irrelevant. Oscars do not have anything to do with labor conditions. Oh yeah. Also, I don't know if I care about this fucking quote from Miyazaki. I'm sorry. Like this is irrelevant. Completely irrelevant. It's just superfluous. Like, I don't care about Miyazaki's perspective on this. It's irrelevant to the conversation we're having.
I'm gonna be honest with you. This next part of the video is kind of dangerous. Dangerous because, well, the anime we know and love is gone. Because it's not just some girls running around on a screen.
That's a dangerous statement to make.
$28 billion.
That's just not true.
It was hundreds of thousands of real.
The anime you knew was always temporary. Like, I don't know what the fuck. Like, when did it stop?
So
like,
fixing
what are we talking about here?
Fighting politics, multi-billion-dollar companies,
yes,
and centuries-old.
That's labor relations, and again, the traditions like have changed. Let's not think that, like, you know, we didn't stay at Astro Boy, right? When we talk about labor connection, we talk about the pipeline of animation. Like, there's some consistency, but like things do change. Remember, like in 1984, was it? It might be I think it was 1984. Toei and a lot of other companies started what they call the animation cap for television, which was that each episode of anime should not exceed 3,000 to 3,500 frames per episode. There was no cap beforehand, so there were some animations that went much higher than that. But I think that because of money concerns, they were like, we are going to reserve how many drawings animators can actually bring to the table for each episode. These caps have now been sort of like removed. They're more of a formality now, so they don't quite exist in the same way. There's like, I guess, a standard there, but some shows do go higher. Like there's no need to stay at the cap. Some shows will stay relatively in the area. Some shows will go much higher. That's is like a preference at this point. But like, that's a huge difference. A huge difference would also be digital animation. That changed the game completely. But like, there are lots of different factors that changed animation as we went. It's not concrete.
I mean, at the end of the day, that just sounds like we're going to need a lot more people. Luckily for us, it's not like this hasn't happened before. 4 years before Tezuka would make his debut, his role model Walt Disney was experiencing a similar fallout.
Oh my, okay. Walt Disney was the enemy of the union strikes, but I don't know if it's actually relevant to talk about here. I feel like it's a bit flagellation to be like, let's talk about Disney, because Disney it's not really relevant. We've already talked about you. I don't think any of this is relevant.
Workforce went on strike for, quote,
I'll let him just fucking yap, I guess.
Disorganized pay practices after the man himself told them that they should essentially shut the fuck up and go focus on making good work instead. Which kind of begs the question, how did Japan go so wrong? I mean, the unions caught up pretty quickly to Disney after what he did, but Miyazaki couldn't? I mean, Miyazaki
could have had a union if he wanted to, but
he
chose
could have fought on for a few more years and avoided this entire shit show. And history would forever know the name of the Toei Animation Labor Union.
I mean, it's still around. The labor union's still here. It's still here.
Take a look at all the anime released nowadays and trace them back
it's still
to
here.
the studio made them.
Didn't go anywhere.
Realize that, well, there's not a lot
it still does things.
Toei here. So what exactly would the Toei Union do for anyone who works outside of Toei?
Okay, so generally in labor theory, unions tend to have an ability to rise the wages of other people who are not unionized in the same area, sometimes maybe at the same place, because of how that works. But the theory usually is with a union. Now, you probably want more unions, right? But the theory is, like in America, right, that having unions who will fight for better wages for their animators means that like their wages go up, and it means then joining Toei is more appealing. So if you're a young animator maybe, and you don't want to be working 1,000 hours, and maybe you're like, okay, I see, if I work with Toei at the unionized place, I have a cap. I only have to do 40 hours, and they'll train me, and my wages will be adequate, maybe enough, and you go there instead of to a different studio. And then the idea then is that the other studio have to go like, I see Toei is sniping a lot of animators. I guess we probably have to also raise our wages too, so they don't take a majority of new animators coming into the industry. Something like that, right? That would be like the theory of practice of a union in that case. That like they do have the potential to raise other people's unions, because if you have better conditions in one studio that's much better than everyone else, then it's more advantageous for people to join that place, which means that it will drain animators from other places, potentially. This is the theory.
Yeah. Nothing. Which is exactly why, even though on paper they accomplished a lot, in reality the Toei union didn't really do much at all. Because
That is just not true, though. Like, that is just not... You can't just say, like, they didn't do much at all. Like, there are definitely things that have passed, including, like I said, the most recent probably being, that I know of at least, being the cap on hours they need to work, which has been in the works for decades. That was something they were trying to pass for a really long time. That's a big deal. But, like, yes, there are many things that the Labour Union tried to do over the years, and also there were some fair complaints. There have been complaints that went public because of there being a union, right? There was complaints a couple of years back about, like, unfair treatment of certain members. But, you know, those stories usually don't come to the public, but they did because of the union being able to be, like, promote that and be like, hey, you've treated some of our members unfairly. We need to fix that. And then Toei has to then respond to that, be like, yeah, we need to change some practices. Like that, like it might sound unsightly, but like that, a lot of stories like that happen in the industry that you'll never hear about. But because the union's there, like it kind of like, you know, promote, it has a voice.
Work to better the conditions at Toei, not anime. And well, aside from Janica, there was...
I mean, you can work at Toei though. That's the key, right? Is you can work at Toei. You could be a freelancer at Toei, which probably won't give you the same rights as a union member, but you can be a salary member at Toei if you want to. You know, that is an option. It's a big studio. They have a lot of projects. If you want to.
Now, it's kind of not possible to make one, which makes anime
again, it's just not true. The idea that you can't make the unions exist. There are unions out there. Like I said, there have been multiple cases in the industry where, like, usually I think it's considered unbecoming to do that, and you may get blacklisted. But like, if you have a big dispute with a company, like if you're a small fry, you may go to a general union, like what happened with 4C. Or what happened with Trigger, and they usually don't have a ton of power, but like they might crowdfund a legal case for you, which is what happened with 4C, and then 4C gets spooked, and then they give you the wages that they were supposed to pay you. Or with Trigger, you go through with the labor case and you win it, and then Trigger has to be like, I'm sorry that we did the thing that we weren't supposed to do and didn't pay you, because, you know, we made some excuse why we shouldn't pay you.
The only instance I know of where the companies are better...
It sounds like it was quite successful, honestly. Like, it's like he wasn't even in the union before. He just joined one and was like, okay, yeah. And then it worked out for them.
Than the workers. But at the end of the day, unions, politics, power, it all precipitates the actual problem. Money. God, the show is fucking weird. Because regardless of how many other things people want to try and solve first, from how inefficient making anime is to the
Again, this is like, I don't like this language, inefficient. Anime is not particularly an inefficient method. Like, there are parts of it that have become... Checks are good. There are parts of it which have gotten worse because of the conditions in the industry. But in theory, anime is a fairly quick, much thinner than the American method of making animation for a pipeline. It has less cogs than a lot of those do. So, like, this idea that it's like, there's just too much regulation or checking. It's like, that's I do not like that angle. I don't think that's correct.
It all stems from the fact that no matter which way you put it, no one's going to work 7-day, 100-hour work weeks for months on end, getting paid anywhere from less than $3 an hour to $5 a fucking day. Because it's just not right. And if you speak in business better than morals, it's not operationally sustainable. And unless people are content with letting Japanese anime, with all of its history, its people, its products, and its influences burn straight into the ground and become another part of history where we wonder what could have been, nothing's going to change. Which means that, well...
there are things that are changing slowly. I don't know if it's enough, but there are definitely changes that have been made, which you can look up and see. I think there was an article from the writer of the anime history book. Thanks for being so useful, just calling this book anime. I think it's Jonathan Clements. He wrote an article on his blog a while ago talking about different labor relationships in the industry in certain places, and things have gotten slightly better in some places, and there have been different laws. Again, I know there's been a freelance law that came out last year, which was to reinforce not that they didn't have rights, but to reinforce freelancers' rights within the industry as labor fighters, and how that, you know, you can't just not pay them and stuff like that. Like, there have been some changes. Maybe not enough, yes, and we have lots of problems. But again, it is always going to be a fight. It's always going to be a struggle. But it's one that, you know, is worth fighting, I would say.
The fate of anime is really up to the people that watch it.
But like in the end of the day, like there is definitely a part of it where it's like really you need less anime coming out. You really do need less because like it's just absurd.
Us to decide whether or not we're okay with the way history is going. Not knowing that behind every opening we
it's just the screen's low pixels, so I'm looking at the image and trying to read it and be like, what's the name of it? I didn't want to move.
What changed so many of our lives continue to fight, to share their dreams with us, to share their stories with us, to share their anime with us. And I think it's about time we give something back.
This is an area where I'm probably going to disagree quite strongly. Because I think what they're saying here, I might have missed a bit there, but from what I understand, what they were trying to say is you as an audience will make it better for them, but
everything is so fucked up. There's so many problems.
I
honestly just feel it'd be best if it went and died.
I don't think that an audience of gaijins can make a difference in an industry they're not part of. I think that is I don't think you can really organize such a thing, because I don't believe in ethical consumption as a thing that is just like you can just. I mean, it's like I'm only going to support studios that are like good to that. Well, you don't know that. Like a lot of this is behind closed doors. Like there's some that we have an inkling that are better than others, but like at the end of the day, it's not. A lot of people are not privy to the information, and it's like, well, if it's all like this, again, it's systemic. It's systemic. So you can't just be like, these are the good ones and these are the bad ones, because that's not how it works. It's a systemic issue. There is sources. He has a document. They're very difficult to parse, some of them, and some of them are just Wikipedia articles. Some of them are real sources. Most of this after this point is completely useless. None of this is just like, again, Miyazaki's eulogy to Takahata it doesn't matter. Again, like I don't think these people should be propped up as just because they worked in the labor union like 40 years ago does not mean they are good examples of what we're talking about here. But anyway, so I think that's the end. I think that's pretty much it. It's just quotes from here, which I don't think there's actually much else here. Otsuka's a good anime. He passed away recently. He has talked in interviews that like, yeah, you used to get paid. He used to get paid pretty good back in the 70s for a time, because of how it worked. But like, yeah, again, I think money is a fickle thing in the industry when you're not unionized, and I think he was in a better position than some. I think when you're a director and higher up animators, you're in a better position to negotiate in some ways, for sure. And I don't know if we should be using con either. 100%. But I don't know, I kind of feel like this is the sappy part here, which doesn't really relate to the point at hand. It's completely irrelevant. But like, I think this idea that you as an outsider to the industry can make a broad difference is a bit naive, maybe would be the nicest way of saying it, because there is nothing you can do yourself. You can promote the problem, you can publicize the issue, you can campaign to some degree, but you're not in the industry. You are not in Japan. And even if you did a boycott, I think it would be ill-suited, because I don't think a lot of Japanese companies are really worrying about that. It's true that outside, international sources are a key part of that area, right? It is definitely a key part of the industry. But I don't think you could make enough cut through as a boycott, because you're boycotting every anime ever. Like, you for a boycott to be effective, you need to pick a very select few targets, and you need to actively publicize what you're doing. And there is no community out there that is doing that for anime, and there is no organization for it. There's no BDS for anime. So this idea is just a bit like, well, no, that's not going to work. I don't think you can make that difference yourself. It is a labor dispute, and will probably need to be sorted by labor disputes with unions or members in that community and the government. Like, those are the parties that will have to ultimately make the decisions that hopefully make the industry a better place to be. But that comes with time. Yeah, and like, yeah, if you are engaging through streaming, then I don't know how much that streaming income is really going to the studios per se. Usually the argument that is made about international fans is like, what is the best thing I can do to help, get money directly to the studio? Say, for example, when Kyo Annie had the fire, there was an operation, there was a system put in place for international fans to get money to the studio because of the fire. They made was it a GoFundMe or something along those lines? They made something like that, right? They got money directly to the studio through a funding program, which they worked out. And then other people were promoting things like, you can buy things directly off their website. Like, I think they were selling things on their website. They have a store in Japan. I don't know if you could have got to it at that time, but they'd have a merchandise store, buying directly from them. These were ideas that were brought up about like, how can you support these people? Some, Trigger has its Patreon, which I don't know if that is the best pathway for that, but it is something, I suppose. It does go kind of directly to Trigger. I don't know if it actually helps get that money to actual employees. Again, this is a problem here. There's a difference between the studio and the staff, right? So like, if you give money to Trigger's Patreon, that money is probably going to go into general projects like running events and other bits and pieces like that. There's no guarantee it's going to go directly to animators getting bonuses or something, is it? In fact, the idea that animators don't get royalties off their cuts is probably a robbery, because if you think about the industry in America, right? And this is where like this argument about unions not being effective is just ludicrous, where it's like, if you do a single job with Nintendo, a unionized job with Nintendo as a voice actor in America, and you are like a background character, you can still get paid. If that game is like fucking Legend of Zelda, you might get more royalties than you got paid your paycheck, because even though it was a small role, it sold a bajillion copies, and you're getting some revenue from that, from it selling a bajillion copies. But that doesn't happen in the anime industry, which like, that would be a fight. That would be like, I think that would be the first fight, or one of the fights, but also it gets a bit difficult with like streaming as well. But like, though that is important. Well, here's the thing about the Anime Dormitory project. I think if you want to support it, I think that's fine. I think they do help animators, but they also make me very suspicious sometimes of them, because they do series of like useful information. They do have like things that they give to people, which is like, they give you the stats, they give you the facts, they run little videos and stuff like that, but they also perpetuate the myth that unions can't work in the anime industry, which is why I have a hard time trusting them. And I think that comes from the fact that like, they have a method of which they operate where unions are not useful for them. So they dismiss unions completely, and they talk about reformation. Like, they're talking about reforming the industry by creating a new, give us money so we can create a new system, and we'll create like some music videos and train some young stars, and maybe we'll create like their plan. They have a model themselves, which is irregardless of collective bargaining, where like, yes, it's good that there's a dormitory for young animators. I agree. I think that their actual trajectory in the end is like a band-aid. That is my concern about them. In that, like, I don't think it's if you want to support them, I think that's perfectly fine. Because obviously, like, I think it's a good thing to have places where animators can stay. That's good. But in the end, the fact they do not fight for collective bargaining makes me suspicious of their motives, because there's literally no reason for them not to, even as like a hypothetical. Because the way they fight against it is they said something like, well, in Japan, the nail that's like not beaten down gets whacked. I'm like, that's a bullshit thing that you heard. That's just like that's a fucking random thing that someone told you. That's a stereotype that you are perpetuating to an audience who doesn't know better. Like, there isn't labor activists in Japan. Like, it's not possible. It's like, no, it's quite possible. It would be complicated, it would be difficult, but it is a fight that's worth having. And I think this idea that you can use some random stereotype like that, where you can use some sort of like conception of like, as a collective society. No, if you're a collective society, then collective bargaining makes a lot of sense, don't you think? It's scabs who are individualists that are the problem. So like, it's just nonsense. But yeah, that's my concern with them, which is why I find it hard to trust them wholesale. Where like I can acknowledge that they do some things where I'm like, yeah, okay, that's good, but they are not the solution. But yeah, I do think that that's the hard part, is like getting the money. Like now, if you want to think about individual animators, it might be easier because individual animators might go to conventions, so you could like, I don't know, buy a signature or some animation or some drawings from them directly off their website, or directly from a convention if you happen to see them going to one. If you're in Japan, it's easier, but obviously if any of them come internationally, you could buy something from an animator you care about. Maybe some animators might have Patreons. They might do all sorts of things, right? They might do live stream. Maybe some animators, some newer, younger animators might do live streams. These are ways you could support directly. The most easy way to support like a direct individual animator. You could make decisions like that. Those are good things to do. It's harder to do that broader, but like I think asking animators, asking people in the industry, like asking studios, how best can I support you? What would be the best way to support you? Is there something I can give you money directly to the studio somehow? Asking those questions is a good thing to do because it makes studios think about how you can create those operations, but it shouldn't be about charity. It should be about labor rights. That's really the key here.